Benvenuti a Ciao Bella. I'm your host, Erica Firpo. For the past 20 years, I've made my home in Rome, where I've worked as a journalist contributing to publications including Afar, Washington Post, Lonely Planet, and Travel and Leisure. I love sharing the stories of Italy's pioneering creators, and I'm bringing these stories directly to you on Ciao Bella. Every week, I'm joined by contemporary artists, heritage artisans, designers, culinary experts, innovative aesthetes, and more. At the crossroads of evolution and tradition, the past and the future, they are working and creating to define and redefine 21st century Italy. Join me as we see Italy through their eyes.
Buon anno a tutti, and welcome back to Ciao Bella and to the Season 7 kickoff, where Erica and I are flipping the script. I'm Jenna Spray, Ciao Bella's production manager. You typically hear my name at the end of the episode instead of the beginning, but today I have the privilege to sit down with Erica on tape to discuss my experience in 2023 as a master's student based out of Milan. A little later, we're going to break down generalizations of Italy and expectations versus reality. Let's get into it.
Hey, Jenna. I'm so glad that you've invited me on Ciao Bella.
I'm so excited to have a chance to speak. It's so fun after being behind the scenes for so long.
Well, it's been a great time having you behind the scenes. I really think you have a great input on podcasts, but I'm also so interested in your perspective on Italy. You've been living in Italy for the past year. I know now you're back in the US, but my question is, you're from the Midwest, you grew up a little bit outside of my hometown, so I'm going to claim a little pride there. Studied in Chicago, but how did you choose how did you choose Milan of all places to pursue a master's degree? Why?
Well, a lot of people ask me that question actually, because I, unlike you, do not have Italian roots, unfortunately. But as a child, I traveled a lot to Italy and kind of just fell in love with it, just the classic story. And given the fact that I wanted to study brand management, and Milan to me is kind of the center of brand activation. When you walk around, you see all of the companies really just putting on a show in their front windows. It's kind of just like going through a museum of capitalism when you go around Milan. I think as a brand management student, it was really attractive for me. Even outside the fashion aspect, I mean, there's Design Week, so there's a lot of different headquarters that are active there. But I also was interested in Italy because I just love the commitment to that artisanship. One time I went on a tour for classic balsamic vinegar, and I was just so struck by the pride that Italians typically have in their products. And this isn't something that you often find in the US. And I was so interested in the way that they brand those products. I'm thinking of Giuseppe Giusti, specifically the oldest balsamic vinegar producer in the world, they claim. So because of those two aspects, Milan seemed like the perfect place for me, and also just my personal fascination with Italy.
One thing we didn't mention is what you studied before you got to Milan. So you were at Northwestern for journalism, correct?
Yes. So I was at Northwestern for journalism and legal studies for 3 years, which left me that fourth year to kind of go pursue this master's degree somewhere that I really loved. So it worked out for me in terms of the calendar. But yeah, also because of COVID, I never got to study abroad.
And where did you choose to study in Milan? Because Milan has some great programs.
Yeah, so I studied at the Institute of European Design, l'Istituto Europeo di Design in Milan, which is one of their main campuses. They have campuses actually around the world, but in Italy, they have them I think they have 7 different campuses, but Rome and Milan are the main ones. There were a couple factors that went into that. Part of it was just the length of the program. It was a 1-year program, so that was attractive to me. I did want to do it in English, even though in hindsight, I kind of wish I had just pushed myself to do it in Italian and kind of drank out of a fire hose and just adapted. But it was actually a great experience because it was in English. It was super international. There were 23 of us, and we represented 14 different countries. So it was a really valuable experience just in terms of exposing myself to other cultures, even outside of Italian culture. So
You said two things. You said international, and earlier you said a great catchphrase, a great catchphrase, Museum of Capitalism, when you described Milan. And, I think that Milan always kind of gets, I mean, more recently less, but it was getting, for a long time, it got, it drew the short straw because it's one of those places that is not the picture perfect, stereotypical Italian destination. It's, you're not under the Tuscan sun, you're not sitting on the Amalfi Coast. Milan's a whole entire different beast. I wanted to know, what kind of expectations did you have of this city before you started living there?
Yeah, so I had only visited Milan a couple times for very short periods of time. And of course, when I did that, I only went around the very center. So it wasn't a good representation of the city as a whole. I totally agree. I think that people have kind of unfair expectations for Milan, because it is the economic center of Italy. I feel like that is kind of its burden, not necessarily the art and historical side, although there is so much of that as well, which is what I discovered upon moving there. I was also looking at Bologna for grad school, and
Ah,
my parents were kind of like disappointed that I didn't choose Bologna. But like after visiting last year, because I had never been to Bologna before, and I love Bologna, it's a great place, but I think for a year, Milan was a better choice for me just because there's so much more there. But I had a lot of people asking me, why not Venice? Why not Rome? Some place that's a little bit more in terms of like a cultural side, you know, a little higher tier in like at least Americans' eyes. And I think like um because it doesn't have that really obvious beauty, there was so much more to discover. I really tried to push myself to see what was kind of, off the beaten path. My Italian friends also, like a lot of them had come to Milan for this program, so they weren't the biggest fans either. And it was pretty funny because I kind of ended up being the defender of Milan a little bit. They all would say, Milan is the least Italian city. Why do you like it so much? But I would always tell them that I feel like Milan is a very Italian city because Milan does not exist for tourists. You go around and you see people just living their lives, going to work, having aperitivo after work. And I love that. I mean, as long as you're not there in July or August, it's a very calm, very normal city, at least compared to Rome, also. I feel like it's pretty organized.
yeah, I would say I feel like sometimes my mind needs to go to Milan to kind of decompress and just not have the chaos that's Rome around me, and not
Hmm.
also not have like, because I think sometimes when you live in a city like Rome or Florence or Venice, there can be that frustration of the over tourism.
Hmm.
And you get to Milan and it's not there, and it's you're kind of like what you would, like you're saying, Milan is for Milan.
Yeah. And I feel that people from Milan are very proud also, and I love that about them. I mean, sometimes it's kind of funny, but I just like every Friday I would wake up, I'd go to the market to get my groceries. My Italian friends thought I was so funny because even they were not going to the market as much as I was. But I just think if you want to find the Italianness of it, you definitely can.
I was having dinner with some friends of mine, and it was a group of different kinds of friends from different cities in Italy, and one of them was from Milan, who was like, they they were saying that Milan is the best city, and we all kind of rolled our eyes and groaned. But they made another point, which is that the amazing thing about Milan is that it is kind of it's the I like to say Rome is the best city for going anywhere in Europe. I realize I'm slightly skewed towards like Rome, going for anywhere in the Roman Empire, which means following the archaeological path. But Milan really is the easy access city to all of these places by train and by plane. And and I think that's also what's so fun about Milan is, like, you can go to the mountains, you can go to the lake, and then if
Hmm.
you need to go to Rome, you can go to Rome. Um, but and I think that's what kind of feeds this city because it's so well positioned, and because it's so well positioned, it's got a different history too, with like the art. Like I love going there for the architecture, and I'm talking 20th century architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the position for me was huge this year just because, I mean, there's the three airports, but if you prefer not to get on a plane like me, it's also very well connected just everywhere else. And the transportation is very much on time. I've found, unless there's a strike, it was really reliable, just like within Milan, getting to school every day, getting around. That's something that I miss a lot already.
I bet. If you were to have to describe Milan in a sentence, how would you describe it for the listeners? Or to tell them why they should visit it?
Oh, that's so hard because I feel like I don't want to encourage more people to visit.
Okay, sorry, it's a horrible place. Don't go, don't go.
It's a horrible place. I would say go to, well, I've always said Milan is a better place to live than to visit. That was kind of my catchphrase all year. I think like if you're the type of person that's going to go from the US for like 3 days on your way to Lake Como, you might be disappointed because I don't think things are pretty spread out. That's another part of it is like it's not like Florence where you walk around and everything is just laid out for you and everything's on display. The history and the art and the architecture, it's definitely there, but it's much more spread out because of like damage from wars and like different things and like prioritizing industrializing over maintaining some of these things. Not that everyone can just like pick up and go live in Milan, but I do think that I kind of did it the right way because it takes some time to uncover some of these things. And like everywhere else, it's better to spend more time if you can. But gosh, I don't know. I'll have to think on how to describe Milan. This year, I've studied and worked along 23 other students from 14 different countries. For the sake of this episode, I pulled a few of them aside to ask them about their preconceptions of Italy and whether those have changed throughout their time here. A preconception I had before coming, which actually was kind of true, I feel like, was that Italy can be very stalled by bureaucracy in some situations, especially like on a personal level. This is, of course, a very international problem. Like I have the same issues trying to go to the DMV in the US, but with my experience right off the bat, I had to get my permesso di soggiorno and I had to go to the Poste Italiane to do that. And it was really interesting because my school actually helped me out in the beginning. And I went in and they were like, "What's your Italian phone number?" And I was like, "I don't have one because I need my permit to get a SIM card. That's what it says online." And I was like so stressed about this. And they were like, no, you have to have a phone number so the police can contact you when your visa is ready. And I said to them, "But if the police are contacting me before my visa is ready and I already have a SIM card, doesn't that mean I've already broken the law?" So it was really funny. And they were like, yeah, no, you just go. The cell phone companies make one up for you. It's fine. You don't really need to have your codice fiscale or whatever it was that they required me to have. But that was when I kind of learned like right away, okay, I have to maybe clarify the priority of rules here. I ended up shipping my visa with no marca da bollo because I was too intimidated to ask for it in Italian. This was like my first week of being there. I went to all these
The marca da bollo is like a stamp that you buy at the tabaccaio.
Yeah, it's like I don't know actually what it is. I guess it's like a stamp. It's like a special stamp is how it was explained to me. But I went to all these different bars and kept asking for it and nobody had it. So at some point I kind of just got too embarrassed to keep asking. So I just went to the post office and I asked the man helping me and he said, no, you do it after. You do it after. And I was like, okay, easy. He knows. He does this every day. So I ship it. My school, I contact my school after and I was like, "Hello, the post office told me that I had put my marca da bollo on sometime later in the process." And they kind of like freaked out because I needed to have this visa to be lawfully attending this school. No problem. My visa went through. The Italian government didn't mind. It wasn't there. So I saved a few euros.
I don't know about in the US because I feel like I haven't had a chance to really dive into the bureaucracy that I probably should have because I haven't lived there for a long time, but and I've had to do it. But there are so many fun stories here. Fun and heartbreaking stories. One of the things that I love to do
I've noticed is what I like to do this on my Instagram stories. I just take a picture when I'm at the post office of, when you're at the post office, the Poste Italiane that you're talking about, where you got your permesso, where you filled out the forms. I take a picture of just the sign that says like the numbers and like what desk they have to go to. And I just put it on Instagram. I don't say anything. And I love getting all the messages back because it's never just like, oh, too bad. It starts out with like, oh, too bad that you're at the post office. And then it launches into stories and people tell me the funniest things on earth. I will tell you the crazy thing that I once had to do was I had to get a passport for my dog. And when you get a passport for your dog, this is back in the day. This is not the dog that's sitting in my lap, but my first love. And part of getting the passport was that you had to submit a blood analysis that said they had the rabies vaccine in their system for X amount of time and that it was active. But what that meant was you had to get your dog blood tested and send it. And I had to send my dog like a vial of my dog's blood through the post office, which I walked up. Because I also, this is a while ago when like you couldn't just walk up with a packed package, like because of security, because of everything that had been going on in the world, you had to have an open package. So I had an open package and a vial full of blood. And it became like chaos in the post office. And I kept trying to show them, I'm like, but this is what it says. And everybody's like, no. And eventually it got sent. But it's just, it's just all those funny things that I have a lot of patience for, I've discovered.
Oh gosh, that is so funny. It's so funny.
And everybody kept saying, but why my perché? And I was like, because they told me to.
Right, like I'm just doing what I'm told. Yeah. Oh, Erica, when I first went in, because the thing is, I don't even have that much experience doing these types of things in the US. I was 21 when I moved to Milan. I was totally alone. My Italian was probably like an A2, like on a good day. So I go into the post office and I didn't even realize it took me like 30 minutes to realize you need to take a number. So I'm like sitting there and I'm like, why won't they call? Like they're not making eye contact with me. Like what? Am I doing something wrong? And like finally this older woman took pity on me and she was like, can you take a number? And I was like, God. Because that's another thing. Everybody assumes that in Milan everyone speaks English. And for the most part, like at a lot of restaurants, of course, like tourist establishments in the center, everyone speaks a very high level of English. But I found as soon as you get outside of kind of that area and you start going to places where it's like a market or it's the post office, like you should not rely on English. And I was glad, like, thank God. I don't know how I got away with my Italian. But I was really proud of myself for kind of going outside my comfort zone and doing that. It got done. So that's all that matters.
Baptism by fire.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works.
Exactly. But Erica, I actually wanted to ask you, because you were visiting Italy a lot as a child regularly. I'm curious if when you actually moved here full time, whether it be to Venice or when you moved to Rome eventually, if there were any aspects that surprised you in terms of just the day to day, the culture that were different than just being there for a holiday.
I think two things. One, so I live full time in Venice first, but I've been coming to visit my family in Rome so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually a really big culture shock for me because I was used to Romans. And Venice is, it's an island. It's an island like culture. So in Rome, it's like you say hi and like, so your friends and you're talking. And Venice, it took me like having a friend took a while, like having like I would see people that I recognize, people recognize me, we would politely say hello if that, but that took a while. And I was at first like really angry because I was like in Rome, like I would have a million friends, and it took me a few months to like really feel a community in Venice. And then when you feel that, when you're part of it, it's like, wow, you're a part of it. So that's definitely one thing. I think another thing for me was just for the, a lot of people I think can get really frustrated at things like bureaucracy or how like I grew up really used to Italian culture, but I grew up in the US, which meant I was used to things like saying goodbye quickly or just like things getting done. And I lived in LA where you can do one thing one day and change completely overnight. And that's not the case in Rome. And I realized I had to learn, like, even though I was so used to like, having a little bit of a sense of humor when it came to bureaucracy, I realized I had to temper my impatience because coming to Rome requires coming to Rome and being in Rome and being, I think, in Italy in general, it requires a lot of patience, and not in the sense that things are frustrating, but there are different ways things are being done. For example, in business, or in general in anything, but you're going to meet someone, you're going to establish like a friendship, you might have to have a few lunches, and if you come from Los Angeles, that doesn't happen like that, and, again, also add the fact that I grew up in Philadelphia, which could be like, that makes me like a little bit aggressive. So I think that was something that was interesting for me. And then it was so funny because I remember talking to my nonna about it, and she's like, I don't understand. And I was like, well, what do you mean you don't understand? And she's like, I don't understand you. She's like, what do you mean you're impatient? And she's like, you know how it hurts. And I was like, oh, okay.
That is so funny. It's like, it's not even, yeah, oh gosh, it was a big challenge working with a very diverse group of people this year in group settings, because I don't know if I've ever had someone tell me that I'm, well, at least in a professional setting, aggressive. But this year, it was amazing because since these were new people, of course, I was, tempering who I am also. So I was being even less aggressive than usual. And I think they still found me quite confrontational. And in a group setting, it could be, I'm sure, very jarring. So it was really interesting.
I wonder if that's also more of a northern thing, because I feel like in the South, there's definitely more, like you can kind of just, in essence, you can be a little bit more boisterous, let's say, in certain situations. You just reminded me of when I moved to Rome full time, my friend Davide, who was a good friend of mine from Venice, but he was from Bolzano. He called me up one day and he said to me, it made me angry, but it was definitely very nice. Thank you, Davide, for saying this. But he said, Erica, he's like, Erika, you have to stick with one thing. And I was like, what? He's like, you can't change, you can't invent things, you can't do things whenever you feel like it. And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, we're in Italy. You stick with what you do. And I was so angry. And I understand what he was saying, because there is change was back in the day. It was hard. Things have actually changed so much. But he was saying, like, you can't just decide to do whatever you want. And I remember being really annoyed with him. I'd like to say that Davide was right and wrong, because he's right in that consistency and having a foundation is really important in Italy. So if you are just kind of superficially dilly-dallying and changing, you're not really going to build anything if you're living here. But there's been, like, one of the things that's amazing, and I think you see it a lot more in Milan, is there's been so much innovation now in Italy in different aspects of business, and technology, that change is happening.
Totally.
Now, as we move into the second half of this episode, where we're going to dive into these crowdsourced quotes about stereotypes and expectations that classmates had of Italy that are actually not true, I'm going to start off with one that really applies to the Ciao Bella mission, and that is the promotion of contemporary Italy.
Another stereotype, that Italians aren't necessarily on, like, the leading edge of innovation ever, or at least in the 21st century.
It's really interesting because what you're saying is so true. I don't know if we can apply, like, what's going on in Milan to, like, all of Italy. Like, I think it is kind of a bubble also. Like, even though in general, like, people are, at least, like, a younger generation, in my opinion, like, there is that, like, desire to push for, like, more innovation and more change. It was so interesting to me, especially, like, during Design Week, just from that perspective. I was totally blown away blown away by how the city transformed, by the different types of people that were coming, the types of ideas that, like, it was just total overwhelm for me in like the best way possible. So yeah, I mean, especially compared to even just from like a transportation sense, coming from the US, I mean, if you are outside of New York, or I don't even know what it's like in California in terms of public transport, if it's very good, but I have been so impressed by the transport in Milan, how consistent it is, how well connected everything is. That coming back to Chicago, it feels like I'm coming to like an undeveloped place.
You want to know what I love also about that, in particular Milan with transport, is Milan had, it's really well connected with the metro, with the trams, and they have new trams, but they keep up their vintage trams. And they don't just keep them up because they're pretty. They keep them up because they work and they can fix them. And I think that's a part of innovation and technology that a lot of people don't look at in regard to Italy. Like there have been a lot of amazing things that have come from Italy. I know that a lot of people don't see it as a contemporary place, but there's there have been so many great innovators and like startups and things like that, but then there's also the people that are able to take something and just keep making it work and make it work really well, and I love that.
It's huge. And even on the sustainability side as well, like I was so impressed with some of the standards that, at least in Milan, they keep, even just in terms of like the waste system and things like that. Like it is very advanced, much more so than Chicago. So it was crazy for me to see.
Come to Alto Adige with me sometime. They
Yeah.
are amazing with like eco sustainability, but also because a lot of these things are they're not, it's not because they're just jumping on a trend, it's because they've always done that. And I was talking to a friend of mine about that yesterday. There's a level of Italian ingenuity that right now people are like eco sustainability, and Italians are like, we've always done that, because we had no choice, or because we found it more pragmatic.
Yeah, no, it's huge. And I think also Italians have a value of like materials, like especially when it comes to food and things like that, like figuring out how to use all parts of an animal, and like it turns into the things that other people might use less turns into like a specialty thing in Italy. Like that's something that I love about it. But
That's what my mom loves too. She's a big fan of like tripe and payata, like the
yeah,
offals.
exactly.
That's where I'm not quite, but I love it, but my stomach doesn't like it as much.
No, exactly. I love it from a sustainability perspective.
This next stereotype comes from my friend Ryoko, who's from Japan. I'm gonna just let her describe in her own words, because she did it so nicely, about how this expectation was not met in the most positive of ways.
So before, everybody was saying Milano is about business, everybody is cold, work, it's like, a business-oriented city. So I was expecting that a little bit, and then I came here, and it's like, tranquilo. When I came here, everybody was like, in Milan, people are like a little bit cold, also, superficial, because Milano is about business, fashion, it's a little bit pretentious. But when I came here, it's like, no, people are very warm, very happy to talk to you, and I think it's a safe environment for me as a Japanese to be here, because I feel accepted, kind of, like the inclusiveness that they have.
What do you think about that?
No comment.
No comment. You agree?
I'm Roman. I love
That's
Rome.
so
I
true.
can't. I plead the fifth here. I refuse to comment.
Well, I
No,
will
but
say everything's relative.
everything, and you know what? Like I said, with Venice, it's sort of the same thing with if you've been immersed in the South when you get to the North, and maybe if you have an idea of stereotypical or a stereotype of Italian culture, the North is a little bit more freddo. It's a little bit colder, but I
Yeah.
guess that's also that's also kind of means you have to understand the nuance, like it, like I guess that like I was saying for Venice, it was not like Venetians aren't going to waste their time like just being like doing like inviting you right away to do stuff. They live on an island. They've had to protect themselves. You know, it's the same thing in essence with, I think, a lot of the northern places, because they're not outside 24/7 like the South is. So the South has that. And the funny thing is, a lot of people have said, you know, that also means the South is a lot more superficial.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
whereas I guess in the North, if you are like interacting with someone who's really friendly, maybe it's more authentic.
yeah, if you that, whereas the South is kind of like they're just friendly to anyone and everyone, but it doesn't really mean anything. Interesting. That's all off the record.
You know,
Don't tell my cousins I said that.
That's so funny. She said this and then went on to say that she's found it to be totally not like that at all, which is so interesting. Coming from Japan, she said that I think what you're saying is very true. Like you kind of need to break through that like top layer. It's almost like once you prove yourself, whether it's through like speaking Italian with them, because also like when I walk into a store, it's very evident I'm not from there. But I think like I also found some very warm people, and especially out of like the tourist context. Like I think anytime you go around the center of a city in Italy, you're going to find people are probably pretty tired of seeing tourists. Going to markets and going to places like on my street, I had this gelateria that I would go to way too often, way too often. And the people kind of got to know me, and I got to live out kind of my expectation for having like my place. Like that's what I wanted when I moved to there, was to have like my bar or some place that I would go to really often where the people recognized me and would greet me. And over the course of a few months, that kind of is what happened. And it was pretty funny. Like there were some cases where like they would give me my gelato and I would go outside, and then the owner would like follow me out and like bring me like a bowl or like bring me like something else to put it in, and just like would bring me extra napkin. It was just really sweet. So it was kind of fun developing those relationships with people.
I think you hit the key, is developing relationships, because, you know, think about this. Someone comes into your hometown and is there just for the day. Like you'll be polite and you'll be friendly. But you might, but you know that they're just a spectator for a day, right? They're just kind of, or even worse, they could be just rubbernecking for that time, right? Yeah. So as the resident, you still want to protect what's yours, which might come across to them as cold, right? Then, people start, it's just like with anything else, you start to see them come back, and you're building that relationship, that trust that they're there for. Not the rubbernecking, not for the spectator, but they're there to be there, Sure. So I think that's like, that when people talk about Milan as being cold or the North as being cold, they're really forgetting that part. Like it's not the zoo. They're not animals to look at.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point.
Now this last quote, which I'll admit is probably cheating because this one is actually from an Italian friend named Luca. He's from Rome, but Luca spent a lot of his life abroad, so I figured he could qualify for this exercise.
Stereotype that people think about Italy, which is not true, is that Italians are lazy. And they just sit around all day drinking coffee. La dolce vita. La dolce vita.
I'd love to hear your perspective on this one.
I hate hearing that. I thought about that. To the outsider, you're right. Italians might not work as hard quantitatively. Like maybe they're not working, especially in Rome, they'll go to the bar, they'll go to the piazza, whatever. Qualitatively, they work far harder. They work better. I think Italians, when they, not everyone, because, this is not, I don't want to generalize, but there is an earnestness to, at anytime you talk to, or 99% of the time, when you talk to someone about what they do, they will really tell you about it, and they will get deep. Some people might just really get all academic on you, or sometimes people might get really passionate, but they really, really, really know. So there is I think they work hard qualitatively far more than a lot of people that I've ever met. There's always going to be the exception, and there's always going to be people that game a system, but things that I've noticed, like when you ask, and I'll be interviewing an artist, and they'll really get into the nitty gritty of like technique and production and things, whereas somebody else might just be like, yeah, I like the color. That's kind of a throwaway comment, but I really do think Italians work more earnestly and they work better.
I love what you just said because I feel like in the US, at least at a certain level, it's so much about like how many hours you spend at your desk or how many hours you spend doing a certain thing, not necessarily like how well you do it or how thoroughly you're doing it. What you were saying just reminded me, even on like a different level in the sense of like when you go to a cheese shop and you ask, I don't know that much about cheese. Like, what do you recommend? I like cheese that's like this. I mean, these people are experts in what they do, and they have a lot of
And they're
passion,
proud.
and they're
Yeah.
super proud. Yeah, exactly. And I think that like there's a definite value to that. And I think, I don't know, you can't necessarily measure work just by how many hours you spend doing something. Although in Milan there is like a bit more of a workaholic culture than probably some other places in Italy.
I think it has a little bit more of that, like for a variety of reasons, that New York vibe to it,
Mhm.
of kind of working in a different way. What I will, it's funny. Yesterday, I was in a spec shop. So spec is a cured meat from the Alto Adige, Trentino Alto Adige, and I wanted to bring some home, so I found this place called the della Spec, like the home of spec, and I was like, that must be the place. And there was all different kinds of spec, and I mean, there was just everything from that area. And so, but I was like, there was a lot of spec, and I didn't really know what to choose. So I casually asked, what's the best one that I could bring home? And we had a conversation about, okay, there were two different cures, like 8 months versus 12 months, how I was going to cut it, what knife I was going to cut it. Was I going to use the fettatrice, which is the mechanical thing? What did I have? So then that would depend on what cut I was getting for the cut. I mean, it was like, I walked out of
Wow.
there and I was like, I am the expert in spec, which by the way, I ate 2 pieces. I was in ecstasy and I forgot everything. I was so happy. It was really cute because also at the same time, after we went through, I got my whole lesson in spec, which was awesome.
Spec is my favorite cured meat, I think,
Really, I
even though
just,
I've
I
never
just,
been.
I just recently converted to it. I didn't
Oh
like it
yeah.
before.
I feel like it tends to be, I mean, I've never been to Trentino, so maybe I haven't had like the spec, but I feel like it tends to be a little less fatty than like prosciutto. What do you think?
I mean,
No?
see, like I'm the kind of person that like I don't care about. I love fats. So,
Oh,
so,
okay.
I like don't even. I mean, maybe I guess it is. It is a little less fatty in that the way it's cut and what comes out.
Hmm.
Like, because sometimes some people like to really pull off the fat from prosciutto,
Yeah.
and then they're left with like that little tiny
There's
sliver, and
like
you're like,
nothing. Yeah.
yeah. Um, I just, I really, I must have had like old or badly cut speck before, but I was always like, oh, this is kind of the, in the pantheon of, Italian cured meats. I wouldn't even let it in the door, that was how I was. And then
Really?
recently I've been a convert. I did. Oh,
That reminds me, I went to Italy a couple days ago and got a Pandoro. Like, they had like a bunch on sale. So I was like, I'll take one of these. It was crazy. They had like a 75% off sale. And it's so funny. The reason that I just got reminded of this is because you were saying like you visited the place where it's made and then you liked it. And I just think that's the case for like most things. Like, at least last year, I was like kind of going around telling myself, like, I'll just try it, even though I've never liked this in the past. And sure enough, it ended up being like the best thing ever. And same with like panettone, like that was like a big discovery for me in December. Then I introduced it to my boyfriend in December. So when we were in Italy last week, he was like, look at these Pandoro. They're on sale. Let's just get one as a treat.
did you guys do the keep it in the bag and put the sugar and shake it?
Yep. And we also, before we did that, we popped it in the oven for like a minute to heat it
Oh,
up, which is how I like to do it because then it gets like a little, my Sicilian friend told me I have to do that. So I just follow the rules. But
oh,
and
I've
I
never done that.
actually, yeah, it's nice because well, especially since this was a sale Pandoro, like I think it could probably use a little a little something. I actually made French toast with the leftovers. So I was like following all of our instructions from our bakers.
I'm so happy because guess what I did the other day? I too made myself with Nicola Olivieri. He's the one who really talked a little bit about the French toast. Also, well, actually, everyone did. I made myself French toast too, and I was so happy. And it was so funny because I said to Darius, I was like, "I'm gonna make you French toast," and I made it with the panettone, and he liked it. And then I was like, "Oh, you like the French toast panettone or panettone French toast?" However I said it, and he was like, "That was panettone." Because he believes that you should only eat it as a slice. He's a purist. And
Okay.
he thought the idea of panettone French toast was gross. And then now he's like,
Super
yeah.
good. Yeah, it's super good.
My sincerest thank you to Erica Firpo for inviting me to participate in this episode of Ciao Bella, as well as for including me as part of the team for the last few months. I also want to thank the Master Brand class of 2023 for a year of laughs, hard work, lots of personal growth, and most of all, friendship. Ciao for now.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Ciao Bella. The editor of Ciao Bella is Mastro. Production manager is Jenna Spray. If you're new to Ciao Bella, take a peek at ciaobella.co, our all-encompassing Italy-focused website, where you'll find insider insight on contemporary Italy, and sign up for our newsletter for new episodes and articles. Follow me on Instagram at Erica Firpo, and follow Ciao Bella on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Leave us a rating or comment. Ciao, ciao!